How do people afford to have kids and a life in New York City? I'm James Bashel, Chief Operating Officer and Financial Advisor at NerdWallet Wealth Partners, and I hear that question all the time. It is possible. In fact, a New York Times article noted that in 2023, there were 1.8 million people under the age of 20 living in New York City. So how are the parents of all those kids managing? Obviously, everyone's circumstances are different, but let's look at a hypothetical example to understand how one couple is making it work. And by the way, if you're looking for help with your own financial questions, click the link in the description to learn more about NerdWallet Wealth Partners. Okay, let's dive into that scenario. Grace and Tom live in Brooklyn with their 6-year-old son, Oak. The couple is in their 40s, and together they're bringing in $500,000 per year and are making it work. But they do have a financial goal in mind. They want to triple the size of their vacation fund. Both Grace and Tom grew up in North Carolina, but they're committed to spending their lives in New York. Sure, heading back to North Carolina is a decent backup plan, but New York is the long-term goal. As many families know, New York or otherwise, the early years of raising a child are tough financially. Daycare is a huge drain on most parents' bank accounts, and Grace and Tom were no exception. But now, Oak is in public school full-time, so they have a bit more breathing room. Before they became parents, Grace and Tom traveled all the time, and they're ready to get back to it. And now that Oak is old enough, he can join them on their adventures. With that in mind, they want to increase their travel budget from $10,000 per year to $30,000 per year. So how do they update their financial plan to make that happen? One of the biggest principles of financial planning is this: you can have anything, but you can't have everything. If you're putting money toward one thing, it is being taken away from something else. So every dollar Grace and Tom put towards that increased travel budget is a dollar they can't go towards day-to-day spending, retirement goals, or anything else. That's why it's important we look at pre- and post-retirement spending when we adjust a financial plan. If we boost the vacation fund, will that delay retirement? If so, by how much? Will the trade-offs in other areas of life ultimately prove worthwhile? These are the questions we have to answer so we can make an informed decision. So let's do some math. Grace and Tom are making $500,000 combined, and they're maxing out their 401ks. Their monthly living expenses come in at $12,500, and then they spend another $1,000 per month on Oak's activities. And up until now, they've been spending $10,000 per year on travel. They're putting $10,000 a year into a New York 529 to take advantage of potential state and federal tax benefits, so that by the time Oak is in college, they will have $120,000 or $30,000 per year saved to cover his college expenses. With that plan, their path towards retirement was on track. Grace and Tom could both potentially retire before 65. Now, when we triple their vacation fund, things get pretty shaken up, and they're left with a few options. Before we get into those, don't forget to check out the link in the description to learn how NerdWallet Wealth Partners can build a financial plan specific to your goals, wants, and needs. Okay, so here are the new options. Option 1. Retirement gets put off by 1 year for each of them, so Grace now has to wait until 64 to retire, and Tom works until he is 65. Option 2. They can cut current or future spending, which means they would need to spend less on monthly living expenses or contribute less to Oak's education. Option 3. Find a way to boost their income. If they could boost their income by 10%, then not much would have to change in terms of their spending. Option 4. Retire in North Carolina instead of New York. Since there is a lower cost of living in North Carolina, the money they have could go further down there. Let's jump into Grace and Tom's financial plan to see how these trade-offs manifest in a financial plan itself. Their total net worth currently is about $1.75 million, and that's broken down into the core buckets we have here. So the first is their cash position. They've got a small amount in their checking account and, importantly, an emergency fund, which represents a very carefully selected number that is not to be used for travel. Any extra travel budget we're able to create needs to not come from the emergency fund, because the purpose of the emergency fund is to save for that rainy day. From an investment perspective, the majority of their investments are sitting in their 401ks, And they do have a joint tenant account, which is their after-tax brokerage account, which is where they're supplementing their retirement from. In addition, it's important to note here that Grace and Tom own their property in New York City. They bought it for $1.5 million, and they currently own about $809,000 on that mortgage. So everything we've spoken about now, net worth, income, savings, expenses, each of those are factual and we can actually record them. But their goals are the more intangible pieces, which we can move around so as to achieve the goals against one another. So the first one we have there is their current family vacation goal for the next 40 years, being $10,000 a year. Now that's the status quo. What we're trying to achieve is how do we triple that number? And we can flex that in the plan as a result. The next thing is retirement age goal was 62, might be a bit later, might be a bit earlier, depending on the choices that they're making. Retirement expense of about $12,000, so very similar lifestyles that they're currently living. Oak's college goal, importantly, is being flexed for expected education costs. They had this question mark, which we had there, and we'll run this in a side-by-side, that they could potentially retire in North Carolina. Now, you remember their current home is worth $1.5 million. There is the potential to retire there and buy an equivalent home in North Carolina for just $800,000, and that would free up some cash. What the planning software then does is it runs a Monte Carlo simulation based on those inputs, giving us outcomes from the best of the best to the worst of the worst, so as to show how the future could look, driven by the underlying financial variables which change the future, being market returns, tax rates, inflation, and healthcare costs. And what that produces for us is a probability of success. Now, given Grace and Tom's age of about 45, that probability of success needs to be somewhere between 70 and 75%. There is time for them to recoup any downside scenarios should they manifest, but not as much time as if they were in their 30s. So that probability of success needs to be in the 70 and 75% range for us to feel comfortable. And we can move all the variables around to ensure that that's the case. So their current plan, being staying in New York and spending $10,000 on travel, gets them to a 74% probability of success if they retire at 64 and 65 respectively, spending what they're currently spending, Oak goes to college as expected, and they're earning exactly what they're currently earning. This is our baseline against which we need to measure any changes required to potentially triple that family vacation goal. So let's talk through the different options we had. The first option we had was to expand the travel budget through pushing out their retirement. So to achieve that same 74% success rate, how much longer would they have to work in order to triple that vacation goal? And you can see here, they've had to work from the age of 64 to 66 for Grace, and Tom from 65 to 67. In essence, tripling their family vacation goal today would cost them about 2 years of employment. Is that trade-off worthwhile? Only they can answer that question. That's not the only way that they could achieve that increase in vacation budget. Let's go to the second scenario we spoke about, which was increase your travel budget to $30,000 by decreasing your day-to-day spending. Let's have a look at how that looks. So we have two buckets which reflect our day-to-day spending. We have our pre-retirement living expenses, and secondly, we have our retirement living expenses. Now, the goal was to have $12,250 pre-retirement and $12,000 in retirement. And you can see we flexed those down to reflect a lower amount, which is the compromise they need to make in order to fund that expanded travel goal. So they need to take almost a 10% haircut in their current expenditure in order to create a 3 times travel expenditure. Is that trade-off worthwhile? Once again, only they can decide. There's a third option, and that is they live in New York City, right? So they can earn more income. So how much more do they need to earn to get into that 70 to 75% range? Well, if we flex up Grace and Tom's salaries by 10%, we get them into that 70 to 75% range. So earning more isn't the only option they have. There's one additional option we want to consider. And you'll remember we spoke about how Grace and Tom were both from North Carolina originally, and while the plan is to retire in New York, there is the option to move back to North Carolina in retirement, sell their New York City home, and live at a lower cost of living in North Carolina. So let's see what that does to our retirement planning. We're able to get to that same 74% probability of success through reducing their retirement monthly expense by 25%, which reflects a good ballpark estimate of what it would cost to live in North Carolina relative to New York. And we can triple that family vacation goal and retire 2 years earlier. So moving back to North Carolina could potentially save them 2 years of work before retiring. So we've contrasted 4 scenarios here, each of which showed a very clear route to tripling that vacation budget, but each requiring a trade-off between variables that we're inputting into the plan. And only Grace and Tom ultimately can make the choice as to which one they would prefer. Financial planning puts these options into black and white. And when you see what your options are, it's easier to understand the potential trade-offs and the decisions you make. And ultimately, the decision you make should line up to the life you want to lead. After all, wealth is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So how we put it to work defines the success or failure in living the life we want to live. For Grace and Tom, they have to decide if putting off retirement for a year is worth it, if it means they get to travel the world as a family while Oak is young. Are those memories now worth shaving off a little from your future spending? The math is done. Now it's down to choosing based on values. So how do families have kids in New York and still have a life? They make trade-offs, figure out their priorities, and update their financial plan as their life changes. So what option would you choose? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful or are looking for more info about NerdWallet Wealth Partners' approach to creating personalized financial plans and investment strategies, click the link in the description to get started. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.